usual at GB News. But, of course, you will be aware, unless, I don't know, you've been under a rock, sleeping somewhere or whatever today, or quite frankly out there enjoying the sun. But Prince Harry, he was in court again today. Apparently, he almost had a breakdown and he was pressured by this and pressured by that. And I was asking last night whether or not people out there had any sympathy for him. I was trying to explain my experience of having my privacy invaded. It didn't convert any of you at all, but having seen a second day of it, are you sitting there today thinking, actually, you do feel sorry for him? Lots of the how do I say this nicely? Criticism. It's basically saying there's too much contradiction between what he says in his memoir Spire and what he basically says now when he's standing in the courtroom. It's all become, I'll start with you actually, Joe, it's all become a bit of a kind of soap opera now. Do you have any sympathy for Harry when you're watching all of this unfold?
Well, he's created a soap opera, Michelle. He wants to star in the soap opera. I do have sympathy. I have sympathy for anybody who has had their personal and private information stolen illegally, as is the case for many, many people. I mean, you only have to think of the parents of Millie Dowler, her phone was hacked after she had been murdered. You know, there are terrible things, and I think the terrible thing, the worst thing of all, is that because you can't imagine where these stories have come from, you lose trust and faith in those that you hold closest.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain to people
your
yesterday.
Family, you know, your closest friends, because where else could it, you know, so it's a very serious issue and it's completely wrong. Unfortunately, I think Harry has been parading his woes in public, poor me, for such a long time. There is very little public sympathy. You know, whether his recollections are true or not remains for the court to decide. But, you know, he doesn't seem to be able to move on. This was happening a long, long time ago.
But why should you have to move on? That's the question that I would ask. If someone has indeed been unlawful in their acts, if they have been going into voicemails or using private investigators in a way that they shouldn't, why should anyone have to move on? Why should you sit there and suck it up and go, well, actually, if it was 2 years ago, I'd have a problem, but because it's 2.5 years ago, 10 years, 5 years, I will just get over it. I don't really wash that one. But there has been quite a taboo, hasn't there, in terms of historically as well, in terms of senior royals, David, being in courtrooms, giving evidence in this way. It hasn't happened, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but what, for about a century or so?
Yes, and I mean, clearly in completely different circumstances where they were treated totally differently with formal deference and, to be blunt, largely got away with lying. And, but I think the Harry thing is a phenomenon which is totally of our time. And the way I think we've got to understand it, it's a conflict between two completely different views of what is truth. There's a wonderful cartoon, and the idea has been used, like all the best ideas, it's been stolen, which is, you know, that the standard, I will tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I will tell my truth, nothing but my truth, and the whole of my truth, so help you God. Now, this is Harry, as it were, because exactly what Joe's saying, because he feels that this has happened, because he feels inside him, he knows inside him this has happened. But unfortunately, he's confronted with another version of the truth, which is the brutal version of the truth, which is established by cross-examination and evidence. And he's got facing him one of our greatest QCs, Andrew Green, and Green simply at each stage said, "Sir, Prince Harry," and by the way, Prince Harry got terribly confused. He thought the instruction was to address counsel as my lord rather than the judge. So Mr. Green suddenly finds himself promoted to my lord. At each point, Green does one very simple thing. He says, let's look at where this statement might have come from. Harry is convinced it was by phone hacking. He will then show, and he shows in the minutest detail, that it came from a palace statement. It came from putting two stories together. It came from, dare one say it, the restaurateur with whom he dined. You know, this sort. In other words, what you're doing is you are reflecting this cult of feeling. This will not stand in an English court of law, and it shouldn't. You should only be condemned when there is evidence. And Harry, I'm afraid, is hopeless.
Yeah, but this is about what all this judge has got to conclude is when it comes to the balance of probabilities, is it more probable that, I don't know, whatever story it is, came from legitimate means, or is
Yes.
it more probable that actually some underhand business was occurring?
And I think that is a very important point, Michelle, because it's a civil court, so nobody's going to go to prison. I think the other interesting thing in today's hearing was Jane Kerr, who is the Mirror's, or was the Mirror's royal editor. And I just think that she was given quite a lot of pressure. Like, where did you get the stories from? Did you know where the stories come? Well, you know, we could talk to any of our colleagues out there in the newsroom. You have to be able to say, you're not necessarily to reveal your sources, but yes, it came from someone that I trust. Did she know it was illegal? We don't know. I think, you know, there's
there's a really there's a very important distinction. You're saying that underhand equals illegal. It doesn't. Backstairs gossip is not illegal. Somebody talking out of turn is not illegal. The only thing that was any of these people were actually accused of that was illegal was phone tapping.
Which they've said they've not done in this case, haven't they?
And unfortunately, there is astonishingly little evidence. But then when you think about it, how would there be evidence? Do you see what?
Yeah, but this is
in other words, again, Michelle, think about it. The evidence has got to be, in a sense, negative. What Andrew Green was able to show was that there were alternative sources for all of these stories. In other words, the argument that I think Joe, to an extent, that you and that the Prince are all putting forward, that these had to come from the illegal means of phone tapping, is not sustained by the evidence.
But all you've got to prove is that on the balance of probability, it did. So yes, the law. And this is
no, you're misunderstanding. The balance of probability is overwhelmingly against the Prince's position.
Well, we shall see when the conclude. But I had the exact same barrister, David Sherborn, who's Prince Harry's guy. He was my guy. I've been through this exact same process with the newspaper group. We settled our case outside of court. I had an apology in an open court where they accepted that.
Can I ask, what is the parallel? What was the issue?
Pretty much the exact same thing, mine on a much lesser scale, to what Prince Harry's had. So I had very personal information printed about me, about my private life, about my relationships at the time, about a pregnancy as well at the time, that I firmly believed they couldn't. How would you have got that information? How? I didn't tell you, the person involved didn't tell you, pretty much no one knew about this, and I went through years of what Harry went through, which is paranoia.
But again, then let's look at what your barrister did. What your barrister
My barrister was Prince Harry's barrister.
Exactly.
Exactly the same guy, David Sherborn.
No, so you're very much on side with him. But let's just look at what he did. He showed that, presumably, that there was, on balance of probability, no other way that information could have been found. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, unfortunately, you're not listening to what's been going on, because what I'm afraid the other barrister, what Andrew Green is showing repeatedly, is that for every one of these stories, there were multiple alternative sources.
But what the pushback to that is,
there is no pushback.
If it was as simple as that, because
there is no pushback.
I'm sure that there was an offer to settle outside of court, and it was Harry that was saying,
I don't think there was. I don't think there was.
I think that would be very interesting, because there is a part that we perhaps don't know about that was there, because there was some report a few months ago about a settlement out of court between Harry and William for an invasion of privacy, maybe not related to this exact case, but that was done and dusted. Now, Harry has chosen to pursue this, and presumably at the same time, his brother and other members of the family were also subject to the same sort of intrusion. If he was standing up there as a spokesperson or as holding a beacon for people like you and all the other people who are not so famous as him, I think he'd have more credibility.
Do you? Is he credible to you at home? Do you sit there and feel any sympathy? Because I went through all this last night. I do sit and look at this court case, and when I hear some of the things that he's saying, I do feel sympathy when he sits there and says...
But sympathy isn't enough to convict.
Yeah, but have you ever lived your life where something deeply personal about you, deeply personal, that has real consequences to your life, has been made front page news, and you sit
Yes,
there,
I mean, of course I have.
But you don't know who's done it to you.
No. But
This is my question. You've answered my question before I've even finished giving me my question. My question is, have you ever been
going
in that
on a long time.
situation?
Yes.
Well, I'll go on as long as I want. It's my show. That your private information is out on their front pages, and you sit there. You do not know who has done it to you until you've experienced that level of paranoia about the people that you love and trust and respect them. Until you've experienced that, you isolate yourself from them. You are distant from them. It affects everything in your life, and unless you've been there, it's really hard.
You're doing my truth. You're doing the triumph of feeling. Now, what this case is demonstrating conclusively is that the triumph of feeling is not enough.
Well,
the
I'll tell
triumph
you,
of feeling